My presentation, as Archie mentioned today, is going to be on risk management, risk mitigation. The reason why that is so important is because if you can manage risk, if you can manage safety well, then you're going to be profitable, because projects are going to come in on schedule or ahead of schedule, because time is money under budget. I presented this similar presentation to the World Demolition Summit in Miami a number of years back, and I was very thankful that at least one of the contractors listened to me. It was Canadian, and they came back 4 years later. The World Demolition Summit was in Boston, and told me, Tim, they applied that one principle, and the principle was that safety was going to start from the top of the organization, and it wasn't just going to be a slogan. They were going to really embrace safety throughout the whole organization. And as a result, they not only improved their safety record as a company, they solved it and allowed them to be substantially more profitable, and their growth was exponentially more for profits. That's what I want to leave you with today. You're going to see a lot of safety focused. The name of my company is Resolute Decommissioning, Demolition, and Consulting. The word Resolute is determined and unwavering what we do, and that's what we want you to do as it pertains to safety. My agenda, a little introduction. I was a demolition contractor for 2 decades. We're some of the largest in the world. We're still the largest today in the United States and the world. Before I went to work at AECOM, AECOM was the largest design engineering and actually the management company in the world. For many years, I was the director there for 12 years, until this last year I took a partner in equity position in a small firm in Bristol. There, I learned a number of things I'm going to share with you today. But how do you prevent injuries and environmental incidents to save money? You need to make sure you do a good job in the scope of definition. Make sure you understand what is defined as looking for, so that you provide competitive looking at estimate. Perform a risk assessment. You as the owner or the leader of the organization do not pass this down. It's responsibility to someone else in your team. And then ultimately, how you're going to plan and work that results in a great job, and a lot of great work and paperwork. You're all familiar with conventional demolition approaches, wrecking balls, excavators, high reaches. This team, we had the opportunity to look at your work that was submitted for awards. And I got to tell you, I was very impressed with the skills and the abilities of the companies that are Russia, in Russia, before. A lot of people didn't know what to expect as it pertained to the skills of the demolition industry, but I was very impressed. That's all. So you're all familiar with wrecking balls and high reaches, excavators, and large equipment that we've seen on the projects. Probably somewhat familiar with specialized demolition approaches. This is where the construction falls over explosively fell, reduced collapse. This requires or involves specific knowledge. Unfortunately, in the U.S., the regulations, the safety regulations that pertain to this are non-existent. There's no formal training in the industry for specialized demolition approaches. I have been involved in developing the first ever 40-hour certificate in the United States for demolition. I'm now sitting on the committee for certification, but within that, there's nothing, we're not going to talk about specialized demolition approaches. And here's what they look like, and there's a reason why, obviously. But my question for you today, as you look at these specialized demolition approaches, are they ingenious, proven methods that you have to use to win projects? Or are they very risky, cost-saving shortcuts that are going to get business? Now, you need to understand the organization who's going to answer these questions. I would suggest you as the owner, the leader, but then there's the process of how you answer it. And the timing is everything when you answer these questions. Again, these are the questions, things that you need to know. Ultimately, you're going to succeed or long over that business. We're all familiar with this unfortunate situation that occurred here in Russia. And I don't need to talk a lot about this. Hindsight's 2020. Every time I watch this, I'm bothered. I'm sure you all are too. It's very unfortunate. But you may not be aware, in the United States and the UK, there has been 12 power plant fatalities in the last 12 years alone, taking down coal-fired power plants. Most of these projects in the US and the UK over the last dozen years have been performed by the best-in-class demolition contractors. And worse, 2/3 of these have occurred in the last 5 years. Meaning this issue is getting worse, it's not getting better. Recently, I was asked to speak to this in a magazine article that you can read, call to action. There's some good information there. Why is this occurring? And I don't have time to get into all those reasons right now. But what I can tell you is I've worked with those same best-in-class demolition contractors over the last year, 12 years, had zero reportable injuries. I think nobody's gone to the hospital. We've got snitches on projects that I'm involved in. What do we do to prevent that? I'm going to share some of that in this presentation. It's not stuff that I came up with. If I had more time, I would give you the history behind it. It's a fascinating story, but there's some best practices that I learned from some $1 billion decommissioning programs that I was able to apply on my projects. So when you look at a project, you need to define the scope. You need to understand what you're bidding. You all know that demolition is a service, it's not a product. That means if it's done right, you can't measure the final structure for QA, QC, for quality, insurance quality control. If it's not done right, there's going to be liabilities, figuratively and literally buried. Liabilities that are going to cost you more than your profit margin, and sometimes even more than your contract. I'll give you 2 examples. I had a client one time that asked me to come out and look at the site. They got a great price on the mission. They had no owners engineer, no assistance, but what they had is an unusable site with a number of massive sinkholes forming because they didn't ask the right questions at the right time as it pertains to how the building was going to be demolished, how the backfill was going to be performed, what they were going to put in that basement, how they were going to cap the underground utilities, the intake and discharge conduits. And then there was another example where a demolition contractor for a company that was the largest in the world in the last century, for 100 years, and they performed a radiological decommissioning demolition project in such a way that it resulted in the release of contamination outside the footprint of the structure. The contract was worth about $40–50 million. They ultimately went $50 million over budget to clean up the project, so it was a $100 million loss. Unfortunately, that largest demolition contractor over the last year is no longer in business because of this and the fatality they had. So it can happen to any and all of those things in U.S. contract, by the way. So when you get your bid package, you need to quickly understand what we're required to do, or what you're required to do, stormwater protection, utility capping, backfilling, what the environmental safety requirements are so you can develop your bid. But what I would suggest you take it one step further, develop a risk assessment. Understand and use a method such as this to determine if it's high, low, or medium risk project and what high, low, or medium risk activities are involved in that project. You as the leaders, the owners, need to understand if there's anything that's high risk that you should be involved. I don't have time to take you through this calculation determined, but I do, if you're interested, the U.S. National Demolition Association has a one-day course. Actually, I helped them develop on just this alone, developing a project risk register. It's something I'm talking to Artem about providing there in Russia as I develop and provide for my clients on a project-specific basis. But in this risk assessment, you determine the severity of the risk, and then you multiply the risk by the probability. These severity and probability is defined here. Artem has a copy of this presentation he can share with you later. And after you list those risks out, as you see here on the left-hand column, you do this simple calculation, probability times severity, you will come up with high, medium, and low. As we all know, a red light doesn't stop, or I assume it does in Russia. A yellow means slow down, at least it does in the US, and green to go. Doesn't mean green there's no risk, it just means it's less risk than the yellow or red. And then you come up with a plan. Again, you as leaders, as owners, should be involved in owning those yellow and red risks, coming up with that strategy or that plan to bring it down to a yellow, or sometimes you can't bring it from a red down to a yellow, just a high risk, then you need to be involved. You shouldn't be passing that responsibility on to somebody else. Here's what some of these risks look like. A little dusty, as you can see. Some of the risk might be the dust. As you can see here in the Chicago newspaper, this was a national story, not that project, but another project where there was no perimeter air monitoring. The neighbors, the state, the mayor alleged that the community was exposed to toxic dust. Again, huge risk. You think about the physical risk of the structure coming down on your operator. Well, there's other risks. Obviously, environmentally speaking, that you need to be aware of and mitigate. This looks fairly simple. It's not. I don't have time to unpack each of these. I could spend about a half an hour on these approaches. But as you know, there's about a dozen ways to take down structures. You can see over there on the right-hand side. The bird mouth, the silo. You can see the small laborers on the left-hand side and the folded over. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these, but these are some of the approaches that have done incorrectly are the reason we've had so many fatalities in the US and the UK. We all know that crane dismantlement is risky. Not only is it risky, it's one of the most expensive ways to take down structure. Unlike construction, where you pick the load up off the ground a few meters, check the computer, check the operators, check the weight. We don't have that luxury in the demolition industry. When we cut something loose 10, 20, 100 meters in the air, it's all ours. There's no do-overs. I can point out some of the things that are wrong in these photos. I don't have time, but I'm sure you want to identify them. So I'm going to move on. You're all familiar with high-risk, high-reach excavators, which can be high-risk depending on how they're used. They, unfortunately, the configuration of these booms allow the machines to get very close to the work that they're performing. And tripping or felling induced collapse. You've probably all seen the structures that have fallen prematurely onto crews. This has happened recently even here in the United States. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Big Cotton, UK, where they're preparing boilers to expose to fell or to trip or pull over, and it falls the wrong direction or it falls too soon. This operator is fortunate to be alive. So again, there's one thing I leave you with today, is you as owners and leaders, you do not pass this responsibility onto your site, onto your crews, and then later on, say that if somebody gets hurt, they weren't following on that. That will not hold up in court of law, at least here in the United States, and it will not help you in the long run. You need to be involved in making these big decisions. So a problem well stated is one half solved. Great quote. So how do you mitigate these? I'm going to quickly go through this through good planning, good execution. If you're quick in the planning, you're going to go over schedule, over budget. Spend a little more time up front, you're going to bring projects in on time. If you just spend a lot of time up front and you have a good process for planning your work, you're going to be bringing projects in ahead of schedule because time is money under budget. This is the key to success. A little more time thinking on the front end with your best people, making sure you've got a good plan to mitigate risk that's going to result in you saving money, time and money. There's modeling methods. Ahmed's going to talk about. Here's the George Dome. It's only 30 meters from a $1.6 billion stadium that we just built. We needed to make sure it came down. Similar to that stadium in Russia, it had a compression beam around the top, and we needed to make sure the charges went off. That beam came in and didn't go out and cause damage. This stadium was actually touching two other structures on two sides. Seismic modeling, again, maybe he's going to talk about this. We need to understand if there's any sensitive relays or equipment that we can trip, or even air overpressure. We had limitations here. I can speak about a half an hour on each of these projects I was involved in and tell you some of the lessons learned, unfortunately. I'm just going to have to move on. Sometimes we may just use our historical data. As you can see here, these two stacks, this power plant, Unfortunately, I should probably tee this up a little better. You can hear Jim. Counting down, but what's notable is when the stack hits the ground, is you can see the sonic boom, and it's pretty awesome. Down in the background there, the right is 1,000 foot or 350 meter stack. These are two, I think, 500-600, well, maybe 200 to 300 meter tall stacks. Here upon impact, you're going to see the shock wave, which is pretty awesome. So again, you can use historical data. Here's a stack that we had to shoot or blast 30 meters in the air because we only had 60 meters in the drop zone. This was in an operating facility. There's huge risk involved. Obviously, there's a lot of planning before we do these things. And sometimes we have acceptable risk. I pointed out to this owner that we're probably going to hit the railroad tracks. And he said, well, there are tracks, it's okay on the inside as long as we don't hit the outside track. So again, you need to understand what your risks are. You need to have a plan for identifying those risks and making sure that your top leaders are involved in that decision making. And then after you come up with that plan, one of the things I want to point out is those plans shouldn't be large. They should be short, clear, concise, maybe with a couple of drawings and figures with names of key roles and responsibilities. And then you have to train your folks, make sure that they understand what's in that plan. Plan is not what the paper it's written on. It's the people in the field who understand it. So you have a process for developing that and training and conveying it to your people. And then I'll end with, as a company, having developed a comprehensive playbook, procedures to manage risk. And I would say if we have, I would suggest that you do. If you notice there's some nautical equipment there, the reason why I provide that is because oftentimes I'll have clients and even contractors say, Tim, give me your playbook. And I'll say, well, there's a problem there. I can give you the playbook, I can give you the tools, but if you don't have the experience operating these tools, it's even more dangerous for you. It's similar to giving somebody this nautical equipment and instructions to use it, sending them out on a ship, and they never sail in the ocean. And they're thinking that they're going to make it across the Atlantic or Pacific. So lastly, and I'll leave you with, on all my projects, I have one same approach, and that is the contractor has to succeed, the owner has to succeed, and we as the third party have to succeed. Nobody gets thrown under the bus. We either all succeed or fail together. And with that, I'm just going to wrap up. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but thank you for allowing me to share with you today. There's my contact information if you want to follow up.